Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. Today on the agenda, we have 3 items: a work session on a resolution to amend our transportation fees, charges, and fares. We have a work session on a supplemental appropriation to develop a crowdsourcing system for Ride-On, and a presentation on OLO's report on measuring climate resilience. As you can see, we have a full agenda, and we hope to get through it in an hour or so. Do any of my colleagues need to make any opening remarks? If not, I'll pass it over to Dr. Orland.
Thank you. First item is the amending the transit fares and the fees resolution. The council approved $175,000 appropriation last May for DOT to do a fare equity study. This is requested by the executive. That report is now complete, and what I would do right now is turn it over to DOT to give a few opening comments, and then Nicholas Hart with the IBI group, who conducted the study, has a short 10-slide presentation, and then we get into DOT's recommendation, or the executive's recommendations and the fares. I'll make my points and then turn over to a discussion and hopefully a decision by the T&E committee today as to what to recommend. This would go to full council on Tuesday if we could do that. So with that, if I could turn over to if Chris Conklin's on the line, if not Hanahan, to give a few comments, opening comments, and turn it over to Nicholas Hart.
Good morning, committee members. I can't see myself, which is unusual, but I hope
you look great, though.
Okay, great. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about this issue. We engaged IBI Group immediately upon Council's authorization of this activity back in July of last year, finished the study in September, got it to you a few days later than we had hoped, but still within the time frame that we expected this study to take. The results of this study are the executive's recommendation, which are a combination of 2 things: a fare reduction to encourage and promote racial equity and social justice, given the profile of ridership on the Ride-On system and the demands on the financial resources of that community, and a simplification of the fare structure to eliminate a number of premium fares and other charges that were reflected in the fare schedule that no longer seem relevant given our climate goals and our equity goals. So those are the 2 things that are in there. The study that IBI went through, which Nicholas will present to you, looked at 2 main factors. One, what was the magnitude of the benefits that we would be providing through a fare equity program, and how would they accrue? And secondly, how is what we would recommend, how does that compare to industry and regional practice in trying to achieve these objectives? So I will hold on discussing the specific recommendations at this point and turn it over to Nicholas Hart from IBI to quickly walk you through the major elements of the study that they conducted for us.
All right, thank you, Chris. And I will share my screen now. Hopefully the presentation is visible to everyone.
Yep, looks good.
Great. All right, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and County Council members for inviting me here today. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to present the findings from this very interesting fare study. Of course, I'd also like to thank Chris and Deanna and all the staff at DOT whose support went a long way in helping us put this together. We've done our best to boil down a lot of content into a short presentation here today. So of course, we'll welcome any questions along the way. As Chris mentioned, we're going to look to sort of cover 3 main study areas here, which include investigating the case for zero and reduced fares within Montgomery County, the findings from a peer analysis, as well as some comparisons between the 4 alternatives that were established at the onset of the study. So to investigate the case for zero reduced fare policies within the county, we started with a comparison of the income distribution between Ride-On customers represented in the darker blue and the county population represented with the lighter blue bars. What emerged was a very distinct diverging distribution pattern. For example, the income bracket with the highest share of the county's population is $200,000 or more, while the income bracket with the highest share of Ride-On customers is less than $20,000 per year. Also looking at median incomes, the median household income for the county population was around $108,000, while the estimated median income for Ride-On customers was only $35,000 a year. To put this $35,000 a year into perspective, It's estimated that a combined income of $70,000 is required to sustain the financial independence in Montgomery County. For example, a family of 2 adults and 1 child. And what this financial independence is, it's based on a definition of a minimum income standard, attempting to draw a very fine line between the financial independence of the working poor and the need to seek out public assistance and services. So taking a look, based on these socioeconomic characteristics of the ride-on customers and coupled with the recent impacts of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, of course, it certainly seemed appropriate that there was specific interest in advancing a fair policy that's founded upon equitable benefits to the riders and the community in general. Getting a bit deeper into equity, for this study, we reflected upon a specific type of equity known as vertical equity, which is often considered in respect to income or social class and often referred to as social justice. And this is where fair policy benefits would aim to favor socially and economically disadvantaged groups to counterbalance potential inequities that might be borne by lower income ride-on customers and county residents. So throughout the study, we placed a focus on considering how various fare scenarios would contribute to improving lower income users' ability to save money, access employment opportunities, and improve their overall quality of life through a reduction in their financial burden. An attempt at visualizing these benefits, we've developed what we've internally been referring to as the circle chart here. But what this does is it demonstrates the notional benefits that are required from an across-the-board fare reduction for various household incomes and family compositions. So along the x-axis here, we see various household incomes ranging from $20,000 up to $200,000. On the y-axis up and down, we see various types of family compositions ranging from a single working parent in the shaded person outline all the way down to the bottom where we have 2 working parents and 2 childs. With this chart, we see that vertical equity is promoted by providing more benefits towards economically disadvantaged groups down towards the left, which is represented by the size of the circle formed by an index on the reduction in annual transit costs and financial stress factors, which we calculate as the typical annual expenses for that family's composition divided by their income. So it's a little heady and it's a little dense, but the main takeaway from this graphic is that it shows that even when a fare discount is equivalent for all users, for example, everyone's saving $1 by dropping the fares from $2 to $1, equity is still promoted by the fact that the discount goes a much longer way when it's providing relief to more economically disadvantaged customers. Adding another layer to this, and one of the alternatives that was considered was a means-tested approach. And when we consider this chart in terms of the means-tested approach, we can view it as an opportunity to promote vertical equity while still retaining fair revenues from the customers who are likely to be less financially stressed. So here, for example, we've overlaid some orange circles that represent groups that might continue to pay full fares based on a common, what we've seen across the industry threshold of about 200% federal poverty level for qualification. So turning the page, after establishing the case for reducing fares based on the socioeconomic conditions and vertical equity considerations, we turned our attention to learning how other agencies are dealing with these similar initiatives. So while acknowledging that most transit agencies serving the Washington, D.C. region are dissimilar to Ride-On in many respects, their fare collection practices can be useful for understanding some of the context and common factors that are related to Montgomery County. So like Ride-On and other transit agencies nationwide, almost all the DC area bus transit providers eliminated fare collection at the onset of the pandemic. But as public health conditions have been improving, although they still remain unpredictable, these neighboring agencies have adopted fare collection policies that are varying considerably. While we see some agencies collecting fares again, some have announced future dates for resuming fare collection, and others have continued to maintain zero fare operations as ongoing and indefinite. Notably, a lot of transit agencies in neighboring Virginia have demonstrated the greatest momentum towards continuing zero fare policies, for example, Dash. But it is important to recognize that the state of Virginia has established a transit ridership incentive program that they're calling, which sets aside about $40 million for agencies statewide to pilot zero fare programs. And although no similar statewide effort currently exists in Maryland, there are interest in zero fare among Ride-On's neighboring providers. For example, Frederick County has continued its fare elimination policy, and the bus in Prince George's County has continued zero fare for certain rider groups. And so while the policies of these neighboring agencies, they were helpful to provide a local context, we did conduct a peer review to explore the policies of other agencies who might share more similar interests as Ride-On. And what you see here is a plot of those agencies across the country. We got a very nice cross-section here. We determined these agencies, based on analysis of key operating and financial metrics, including their bus fleet size, annual boardings, their average bus occupancy, fare recovery, and their fare revenue per passenger mile. Interesting in this chart on the bottom left, taking a look at some trends of average bus occupancy and Farebox recovery ratio. We do see that Ride-On shared a similar ridership and revenue trajectory as its peers, basically declining both in terms of average bus occupancy and the resulting amount of fare revenue that was collected. What we've seen, kind of across the country and across these peers as well, is that this decline in ridership, as well as the decline in the revenue recovery, has had a lot of public discourse around zeroing fares and providing more discounted options to low-income users as well. And so while many of these transit agencies across the country have taken risks and become precedents for zero and reduced fare policies, only 5 of the 22 peer agencies up to Ride-On that were identified have done so. Well, we have these 5 agencies here, which we can see is Samtrans out in San Mateo, California, UTA out in Salt Lake City, RTD Denver, offering income-based fare discounts. We also have Kansas City and Albuquerque, who are the ones who have taken a further leap and have gone towards approving or implementing the zero fare pilots for all their riders. As most are probably familiar, Kansas City has been doing this for the past year or so and has commitments through 2023 to do so. Albuquerque is sort of the new one to the party. They just recently approved their zero fare pilot this September, and they have a proposed commitment for the entire fiscal year of next year.
And Mr. Hart, what's been the impact on the ridership in Kansas City?
It's because of the onset of the pandemic, it's been difficult to sort of comprehend and untangle, what's been going on. There have been some favorable results, politically. One of the challenges they are facing is they haven't identified a lot.
What does that mean, favorable results politically?
I think, the benefits are there. As we'll see in a couple slides.
It's popular. You just mean it's popular with the public? Okay, yeah.
It's popular with the public.
Okay, right.
Yeah, sorry. Yep.
Right.
And so interestingly, actually, that's a good segment into the next slide here. Looking at these agencies who have offered these discounted fares or zero fares, we took a look at some metrics to try and understand why they went with this approach. The first one we looked at was, kind of the fiscal lift for zero reduced fares for the agencies, which we've approximated based on the amount of fare revenue that the agencies were collecting per capita before they went zero fares. And so what this does is it roughly captures the annual per person cost of converting to a zero fare system. So we see here, agencies with higher fare recovery per capita are more likely to be hesitant about becoming a zero fare system, while the agencies with lower values have a lower, more fiscal lift to provide this free transit to their customers. Looking at how Ride-On compares, we see that their fare revenue per capita is around $21 currently. This was pre-pandemic back in 2019. And we do see that they are clustered or more in line with the agencies that have offered means tested fares, which range from $10 to $27 per capita. For the zero fare agencies, we saw much lower values here at $5 or $9 per capita. So Ride-On's approximately 2 times the amount of fiscal lift as Kansas City, or 4 times the amount of fiscal lift as Albuquerque. On a similar note, we did see similar relationships observed for other fiscal measures such as fare recovery ratios and the amount of fare revenue per passenger mile traveled on the system. The second high-level metric we looked at to try and explain why agencies might be shading or favoring towards the way that they did was the median income of the regional population that these agencies were serving. And this was a good indicator because it kind of speaks to how zero or discounted fares might be able to improve the financial well-being of a majority of the transit customers that they are serving. So for example, agencies serving populations with a lower income, they might be feeling more pressure to explore these zero fare policies or across the board discounts because a much more proportionally large lower income population of their ridership exists, while agencies that are serving population with the higher incomes might look more towards the means tested policies because they can capitalize on opportunities to maintain more significant fare revenues from the more affluent customer segments within their ridership. And once again, here we see by this measure that Ride-On shades a bit more towards the agencies that have implemented the means tested fares. You know, Ride-On has about 2 times the median population income of both the zero fare agencies. And so while these pure agency comparisons, you know, somewhat suggested that Ride-On might be more situated towards implementing a means tested fare policy, it does, you know, come with a bit of a caution that a considerable amount of fare revenue must be retained in order to offset the level of effort that's required to administer a means tested program. So as you can see here, what we've kind of thrown together on the slide here is some of the steps that some agencies have been taking, you know, in terms of administering their means tested program. And there's a lot to undertake here. You know, first you start out with scoping, establishing your eligibility criteria. And then finally, when you get into the swing of things, you have to do a lot of work to identify eligibility. You have a lot of intake and issuance, you know, verifying applications, updating your card tracking system and fulfilling card orders. You have to maintain a lot of customer support as well, you know, in terms of operating a customer service center dedicated towards the means tested program. You have to have a lot of due diligence on, you know, making sure you're tracking lost card requests and deactivating those lost cards and fulfilling those replacement card orders, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to think that's realistic.
Yeah, so it is a lot to undertake.
Our housing department, for your information, just said they couldn't possibly administer even an attestation by tenants that they need rent relief. So I can't imagine how we're going to test the means of every bus rider. So we can probably keep moving because we don't have a lot of time. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and just quickly, you know, one slide here, you know, there are ways that those costs and those burdens have been reduced in terms of implementing those programs. For example, we can look to agencies out in California, you know, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and their fair product, the Clipper Start, you know, a lot of agencies have sort of teamed up to implement these programs and lower their costs of administering a means tested program. And similarly, we have Orca Lyft, which is out there in the Seattle region as well, a conglomerate of those transit agencies. So that really takes us to our final slide here, which is a comparison of the alternatives. Just to remind everyone, we had the 4 alternatives. Alternative A, which was the zero fare for all riders. B, which was a zero fare for all riders on the weekend. Alternative C was a half fare for all, reducing the fare from $2 down to $1. Alternative D at the start of the study was left a little open-ended in terms of a means tested approach. We ended up refining this based on peer analysis and what the industry practice was for an agency similar to Ride-On. And so when we modeled this, we were looking at that 50% discount applied to customers that were achieving 200% or more of the federal poverty level. Without going into too much detail here, you know, it probably comes as not too much surprise that, you know, where you're spending more money to offer a greater fare benefit, you know, a lot of these metrics turn out more favorable in terms of what they're accomplishing when you're looking at the amount of riders that are generated. Also, you know, some of the transit operations in terms of productivity, you know, your equity, you are receiving a higher impact as well with a zero fare versus a half fare. But I think what it kind of boils down to, and what Chris will be speaking to in a moment when you're sort of considering the recommendation, is the overall cost of achieving those benefits as well, and how far, you know, you can kind of afford to go to achieve them as well. So I'd be happy to, you know, dive into some specifics here on these metrics, but I guess in the interest of time, it might be better if we jump over to Chris and let him explain, and then we can sort of point to any of these as necessary within the discussion that ensues.
Sure. Thank you, Nick. Just a reminder, the goal of this whole initiative was to come up with a program that provides the most benefits to our residents that need and use these systems in a way that preserves the capacity to operate the system and preserves our interest in advocating for a regional approach to these programs. So we briefed the executive on these findings, obviously before transmitting his recommendation to you. His longer-term preference is to pursue a means-tested program at a regional level, much like the examples Nick described in Seattle and the San Francisco region, where at a regional level, the means testing, fare median, and all those administrative functions are consolidated among the regional fare manager, in our case would be WMATA. Without that regional approach, the benefits of going with a means-based tested program are largely eroded by the costs of managing that type of program. So ultimately, the executive is recommending to you that you go with alternative C, the half fare for all. And why would we do that instead of zero? Well, if we go to a zero fare, our motivation and our ability to participate in a regional program is diminished because it would require us to reinstate a fare in order for that program to be relevant to us. It also, a zero fare eliminates a very significant portion of the revenue that Ride-On relies on. Of course, most of the revenue is tax supported, but we are still using about 20% of revenue from fares paid by customers, and that would drop to 10% or so under the executive's recommendation. But that piece of revenue is still significant, and insulating the service against potential service cuts or other deterioration in service quality under budget pressures that, while we don't have right now, based on significant federal aid that's been provided to transit providers and to us directly, that aid will work its way through our system within the next 12 to 18 months, and we will be solely reliant on local generated revenues after that to support the system. The other component of the recommendation is to apply these discounts to the Ride-On system. WMATA obviously has its own governance and its own fare structure and its own responsibility to meet the needs of these customers. And we don't feel that we should eliminate the incentive for WMATA to solve these issues for their own system. And through doing that, benefit customers, not just in Montgomery County, but for the whole region. When you look at the discounted fare programs that have been implemented in this region, those agencies have not extended those programs to WMATA services, but have applied them to their own operation. And this keeps us consistent with a regional approach to trying to address these issues and encourage the region as a whole to come back to a unified way to deal with fare equity that has the biggest benefits across all of the customers in the region, regardless of which agency's services they use. It also keeps us responsible for our own cost control. We obviously don't have cost control over WMATA, and it is a significant financial commitment in the long term. We do anticipate that through the Reimagine Ride-On planning study, which the comment period on the scope just closed earlier this week, that there may be some reconfiguration of the service mix and geographic distribution of services between WMATA and Ride-On county operated services, so that some of the concerns about customers having greater access to one provider or the other may be addressed in the coming years. And we are viewing this as a long-term fare program rather than something that's just a continuation of what's been implemented over the last 2 years or so. In terms of Dr. Orland's packet, the only other issue that I would mention is Metro Access, and changing the financial profile of Metro Access to the state of Maryland. There is some risk to that could be a trigger for changing the way Maryland has treated Metro Access customers. There's some obvious direct impact if you were to extend a fare discount program to Metro Access, because the fares that those customers would be paying is lower. There's also a likelihood that it would induce some more use of that system. And all of that is significant only because the cost of providing those trips is extraordinary, at the level of $50 to $60 per trip that Metro Access carries. So those passengers obviously need and deserve the service, but the financial implications of more use and lower revenue support to that from Montgomery County are significant factors to consider. So with that, I'll stop and open up for any questions you have of the presentation or the executive's recommendation, or otherwise turn to your conversation of the matter.
I ask that the screen sharing be taken down. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I was hoping just to give my recommendations out of the way and then turn it over to the committee unless you want to get right
Sure.
into
Go ahead.
it. I'll try to be brief. Chris and Nick already talked about why all scenarios B and D are probably not ones you should consider. So it really is down between A and C. A being eliminating fares and C being $1 the executive's recommending. The costs are summarized on bottom of page 2 of the packet. Just to give you a sense, on a yearly basis, the cost of just eliminating fares on ride-on solely is $20.5 million a year, and going to half fare is about half that, $11.2 million. For the rest of FY22, in other words, starting in January through June, it's $11.4 million additional cost to the budget versus, and $5.6 million for the half fare. The main point I really want to make here is to try to equalize Metrobus and Ride-On once again. For decades, we were kept them the same because Ride-On only represents about 60% of all bus riders in the county. The other 40% is Metrobus riders. And there's the same revenue, same income profile, the same populations, really, the same number of equity emphasis areas that they run through. And we try to treat out all the bus riders in the county equitably. We do that in the, Kids Ride Free program, and we do that in the Seniors Ride Free program. We've provide subsidies to WMATA so that Metrobus also doesn't charge seniors or kids. We haven't done that in 2021. All of 2021, we've had this discrepancy between Metrobus riders, and there are 7 or 8 routes in the county, and you've listed in the packet, all over particularly the lower and eastern part of the counties, where they're paying $2 a trip, where ride-on's been free. So if we were to extend this, I would recommend that whatever you do, whether you go to free fare for ride-on or half fare, that you apply that to Metrobus. WMATA will be taking this up during the course of the FY23 budget, but any decision they make won't be effective till July 1st. And historically, that ends up being certainly a budget item, and the Virginia jurisdictions in particular have been more conservative than DC and Maryland. And of course, all 3 jurisdictions have to grant a budget. So I think it's highly unlikely that they will go to free fare. They might, but unlikely. And there's been some discussions that, well, if we have differing rates, people can just choose to take ride-on instead of Metrobus. Well, that's not how the system is set up. There's no competition. When ride-on sets its routes, it works with WMATA to make sure there's not duplication. Otherwise, it'd be a waste of resources. So that's really not an argument for that. So the bottom line is my recommendation is to actually go with the executive on this one, go with the dollar. And the cost would be $9.5 million for the rest of the fiscal year. You need to do a supplemental appropriation to do that. $3.6 million for a supplemental appropriation for Metrobus, $9.5 million total impact with the lost revenue to Ride-On. And if you want to spend more money than that on transit, there are other things you can do. You can deepen the discount on for call and ride, which really is a means-tested program. These are very poor individuals or families, seniors and disabled folks. You could also add some bus service in equity areas, which is one of the also requirements or recommendations of groups to try to make things more equitable with the county, within the county. And then I have one other comment, which is that a different rate. The executive is recommending changing the Metro Rail to Ride-On transfer cost to $1. Metro Rail or WMATA charges no transfer, basically zero transfer cost from Metro Rail to Metro Bus. And again, to try to treat all bus riders the same in the county, I would recommend that rate be reduced to zero for the Metro Rail to Ride-On transfer within Montgomery County. So in summary, that's my recommendations, and I'll chime in later if you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Orland. I'll just chime in, and I'm sure we'll hear from my colleagues. I want to thank my colleagues for quite a while. We've been talking about and pushing for this fair equity study. It's nice to see it come to fruition. Thank you, Director Conklin, for putting it together, and Mr. Hart for all your work on it. It's interesting that it shows what I think we've all sort of understood intuitively about the demographics of our ridership, but also I found the slide about our the comparison of our Farebox recovery interesting. That we have been historically collecting a higher percentage of our of revenue from our riders than other jurisdictions, higher than Prince George's, higher than Charles, that is right on the backs of what we know are our riders who are averaging or median income 35,000 and overwhelmingly of color. So I think the actions that we've taken to provide them some economic relief in the middle of this recession are entirely appropriate, and I'd like to see that continue because that hasn't gone away. I think it's really helpful to have the report to look at a lot of those details, but to me, I respect the county executive's perspective and the need for, I know you want to bring in revenue for the department, but as I said last week, I respectfully disagree with that position, especially as our residents are still recovering from the pandemic and the very high unemployment rate that we have in the county and the lack of job growth that we continue to see and we've seen for several years. Earlier this week, we just capped rent increases due to the economic conditions. That was a difficult decision, but we wanted to support our low-income tenants, and I don't think that this is no different, particularly given the demographic information that's in the study. We are forced by state law to collect most of our revenue through regressive methods, through a flat income tax and flat property taxes and flat fees, and have the opportunity with our ride-on fares, particularly now supported by the data in this study, to decrease the financial burden on our residents who use the system the most, and to hopefully encourage choice riders to ride, which is consistent with not just our racial equity goals, but our climate goals as well. So I hear you, Director Conklin, about the dependency on Farebox revenue, but I think that's sort of a problem, not an asset. And regarding WMATA, I feel strongly as our member on the WSTC, and I see this every month, that we need to exert Montgomery County's appropriate influence over WMATA. The CE left our board seat vacant for years at a time when WMATA staff were proposing 19 stations be closed. They could have easily closed 6 red line stations, and we would not have had a Montgomery County vote in the room. We need to use our board seats to exert influence. I agree we should have a regional approach. I think we should be leaders in the region, and that we should push WMATA, which has a large surplus coming from the federal government, to encourage ridership by granting the same fare holiday that we have been granting for our riders. The demographics aren't really any different on Metro buses than they are on ride-on buses. I think we did the right thing over the last year, and I believe that we should extend the ride-on fare holiday from January 1st through the end of the fiscal year. That would allow us the opportunity.
You are not incorrect. I think we are limited in what we can do or should do and focus on ride-on right now.
I suggest it looks as if the committee is unanimously in favor then of extending the fare holiday through June 30th. And Mr. Reamer, the decision about WMATA would be a separate action anyway. Now, of course, it would be $7.7 million. But if you or anybody else wanted to introduce that as a supplemental or special appropriation, the council can take council can take that up separately over the next few weeks and then decide that amongst everyone. It sounds like we know what the committee is, but the full council, we don't know. So so with that, I think, Mr. Hucker, I think we may be done with this item.
Could I ask one clarification question? With the holiday, would the holiday be referenced in the current fare policy or in a proposed fare policy?
It would probably be the current fare policy. We just take the last resolution that was adopted. This is my suggestion. Is we just take the resolution that was adopted on September 28th, change the language at the very bottom of that page to say the fare holiday is extended through, well, I'll say June 30th, but whatever the right day that week is. I'll talk with you guys about that.
Okay.
Usually anything on Sunday, but that's a
Thank
good read. So is that, if I correctly characterized the committee?
I think so.
For me,
Everybody good?
Okay, so that'd be unanimous. With that, I think we can go to the second item.
Yep.
Um,
Thanks, everybody.
This is a supplemental appropriation request from DOT for $720,300, $450,000 from a federal grant, and $270,300 from the Mass Transit Fund. And this is develop a crowdsourcing app.
Sorry, can I ask about that, Dr. Orland? Just because I don't want to lose it. I hate to interrupt you. Sorry, but you said federal grant. Is it a federal grant? I thought it was just federal funding. Did we get a grant for this app, or is it unrestricted federal funding?
No, it was a grant that we specifically applied for.
Just to use this company's app?
I'm not sure about the company, but to deploy this type of crowdsourcing information about bus load to make service adjustments.
Got it. Okay. Thanks. No, that's an important distinction, that it's not just federal funding generally. Sorry, Dr. Orland. Thank you.
No, that's okay. I appreciate it. And so there's basically two purposes for this. One is to give riders information about we're still hearing that noise. One way of telling a rider is the bus that's coming full or not, or she can decide if they really want to get on the bus during COVID if the spacing isn't adequate for them. And the other is to make it easier for the driver, basically, in situations where there's a lot of demand, a lot of passengers on a bus, and there really needs to be a tripper bus or a bus added to the run for that day or for that time of day to pick up some of the demand, rather than the driver then having to divert his or her attention from driving to basically converse with the dispatch, hasten another bus stop. Dispatch already know that information, will do it on its own. And that's something that would continue even past COVID, particularly probably more likely after COVID, when ridership really gets back to, we hope, is the normal higher level in the past. The Racial Equity and Social Justice Office reviewed it, and they were sort of neutral on this as to whether or not it was beneficial. I didn't say it wasn't beneficial, but they just said it wasn't terribly beneficial to folks of low income and minorities. Because they're saying most people who have to take that bus. Don't have the choice of waiting for the next bus. I also have questions myself as to whether or not, for example, riders at the beginning of the route will have any more information than they would normally, because at the beginning of the route, there's very few riders on. How will they know what it's eventually be towards the end of the route when buses are full? And even when you're living closer to the end of the route and you're trying to get home, with the bus you check in on, the one maybe 20 minutes away, the time you get to the bus stop, that bus the ridership is, or will we even know that because riders could be getting on as we go along? So I'm not sure about the utility of that part of it. I can understand the utility of the second part, which is relieving the driver for being able to having to do the thing to triple bus. So I'm sort of frankly neutral at whether or not you should approve this appropriation or not. I can recommend against it or for it. The only thing I'm saying is that if you do decide to approve it, it should the appropriation for the county part of it should be reduced by $108,550. That is the amount for part of 4 current fully paid for Transit Service Division employees, and so there's no reason why that appropriation needs to be made. It was appropriate to include in the FTA application for the grant, because oftentimes those grants are looking to in-kind services as part of the match. But in terms of appropriation from the council, it would be duplicative or redundant to do that. So my recommendation is, if you decide this is a good idea and you want to do this, that appropriate a total of $611,750, not the $720,300, and that the reduction would be in the Mass Transit Fund portion of that appropriation. And that's some of my comments.
Chair Hawker?
Yeah, Councilmember Glass.
Okay. So I appreciate the question that you actually asked just at the beginning, Mr. President, about the funding and what it was specifically allocated for. And so I understand the rationale for this app, but I don't think that it's the right investment right now. I'll just say off the top, because as a frequent user of other apps for Ride On and for mass transit, I geek out looking at some of this stuff, and I know others who do too. There are other crowdsourcing features that exist in other apps that are already being used, and so I'm not quite sure we need to reinvent the wheel or reinvent the app in this way. But I have a question for Director Conklin or Mr. Hibbert, whoever can answer. So the grant that we got from FTA that was approved for, I guess, an app application or online function, can you elaborate a little bit more about what either the request was or what is what's within the scope of work for the funding?
I'll refer that to Mr. Hibbert, but I think he's the one with the audio difficulty.
I hope I don't have the audio difficulty, so I'll try to answer the question. This is a research grant that the FTA has a program for communities like ours to develop applications to make it better for the customers to use the system. One of the biggest concerns during COVID was overcrowding on buses. People didn't want to get on a crowded bus. So what this does is using existing APC, automatic passenger counter information that's always transmitted from our buses into the system. So when you pull up the app on your phone, you'll see if you're grabbing the Route 55, there are 48 people on the bus. You wait 8 minutes and the next bus has 3 people. So the person waiting for the 55 can grab the next bus, knowing that they're getting a bus that's going to be less crowded. The other issue, as Mr. Rowland explained, is that it does allow the system to send messages for our central communications that bus with 58 people, hey, we need to put another bus on the tripper to kind of reduce the crowding on the system. The FTA saw this as a very innovative application of existing technology and thought that this could be transferable to other communities across the country, and they treat this as a research grant. And they think this has greater applications to all transit agencies across the country, and that's why we were selected through a competitive process to get this grant.
Okay, so I appreciate you elaborating on the nature of that. And when I or anyone uses Ride-On's current app, I know that one of the features that it has is showing the real-time locations for Ride-On buses, but there are glitches in the current app in that it doesn't always show, with 100% accuracy where those buses are and when they're going to be arriving on time. And so sometimes they don't appear, right? And I've stood on Colesville Road or elsewhere waiting, and it doesn't always show up as the app would have indicated. And so based on what you just said about the functionality or the intentionality of these funds, I'm curious if it could be augmented and be used to improving actually Ride-On's automated vehicle locators, so that the buses actually speak better, whichever word we're using, with the apps, with the currently existing app, just to increase our app functionality rather than trying something else that might not be the best use.
I am a frequent complainer about the issue that you report, Councilmember Glass, because that functionality is problematic, and it relates to the outdated computer-aided dispatch program that Ride-On is about 20% of the way through transitioning out of. So the fix to that issue has already been figured out and procured, and the installation process is underway. The issue is with the drivers signing into the route at the beginning of the route. If they don't sign in, the bus isn't logged to the real-time system. So that's with the implementation of our new dispatch system that will be resolved.
Okay, so a fix is already in the works for that, you're saying?
Yeah, that's one of my main frustrations because it's very prominent around Rockville Metro Station. where buses are switching from one route to another with the same driver, same vehicle and service.
Well, then I'll just ask one more question before turning it over to colleagues. So maybe it's more of a statement in that if this was a grant that the federal government, put an RFP or whatever process it was out for an app during the pandemic and to better manage public transportation during the pandemic, while we are still in the pandemic, any development of the app, I would assume, is going to come in a few months' time when hopefully we are out of the pandemic after 85% of Montgomery County residents have been vaccinated and all the other benchmarks and criteria that we have qualified for the pandemic have passed. And so is there something else that we can do to look to better support public transit after the pandemic than doing something for the pandemic that will come after the pandemic, if all that makes sense?
It does make sense. And what the principal long-term value of this, independent of the transparency to our customers about how many people are on a bus, which is important, I think, under any circumstances. But the principal long-term value is what Dr. Orland described, is giving more immediate information to the central communications and dispatch service so that we get better value out of the reserve buses we have at metro stations that go into service when we have either a disruption or an overcrowding situation. And that is of long-term value independent of public health issues.
Okay, fair point, and I'll turn it back over to the council president.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the reason to support the funding. Is it one-time funding?
Yes.
Yeah.
But an ongoing expense.
It's not a recurring expenditure. It improves the operational efficiency of the fleet, helps us address a significant complaint for riders that they, the buses are full. So it'll help us manage that better. And
Mr. Reamer, there is an ongoing expense for the it's $250,000 a year in terms of maintenance, which would be on the county. On the other hand, if there are other jurisdictions in the region that want to use the same software, they can share in the cost of that maintenance, so it would come down some. But there is an annual cost.
Would MATA be a potential partner, I suppose?
Potential.
I mean,
just like the last conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, but it is related to the last conversation. I mean, we want to spend $20 million annually on fares and not spend $200,000 on operational improvement. Like, I think we've got to put our, we got to work on the machine as well as, how people access it. So if the department feels that this has relevant operational advantages and is worth $250,000 in annual expenditures, I won't second guess that. I'm generally favorable towards investments in technology, and I think it can really pay off in broad ways. So
definitely appreciate that perspective. If it's not of value, we will stop paying for it.
Yeah. All right, so I'll support it. Thank you.
Just a few questions, Mr. Conklin. So where did the idea originally come from?
Our transit division, when looking at this innovation and technology grant opportunity, and recognizing the unusual operations at the time of the application, so this would be a way for us to try to maintain physical distancing and address the issue of the radio communication to dispatch the additional buses in the cases of crowding, which could only happen through manual communication currently.
And right, so this concern presumably is happening all across the country. Do you have any sense of why there aren't any other local jurisdictions doing this?
I think people are pursuing this in a variety of different ways. Yes, this is a research application, but I don't think we're the only agency trying to understand this issue and manage this issue better.
And not WMATA, they haven't taken this up.
Not this specific approach. I do believe they have some crowdsourcing information on their operation.
Okay. Also, I'm sort of surprised by the packet that it named one particular company. Wouldn't this need to be competitively bid? I'm used to packets identifying a need and then putting, showing the public the need, and then assessing which companies could meet that need and want to bid on an RFP. I can't remember ever seeing a packet for something that seems like not unique software, identifying on the front end an individual company before there's even an appropriation.
I'll let Dan speak to the specifics of this program, but in several of these federal grant opportunities, there is a preference for you to partner with the provider in making the application, particularly when it's, for example, bus and bus facilities with the Proterra buses we delivered. Proterra was named in that grant application because that's the way that program was structured by the federal government. I'm not as familiar with this particular program, if that's the case here. Dan.
They're looking for partnerships, and MoveIt, who is the application developer, understands how well and how the system works, taking the data from the APCs and transferring it into the central communications system. So that's why we partner with them, and the FTA appreciated that we have a partner that understands this type of technology and its application nationwide.
What's MoveIt's relationship with the FTA?
They're a vendor out there, but they're nationwide, and they have these technologies that can support this. Although this is new technology, they're actually the ones creating the link between our APC data and central communications. And that makes it unique. And that's why they thought it was a pretty innovative grant to go for.
So are there other providers? So is there are they like they're a preferred provider for as far as the FTA goes?
I would assume so, since they recognized that it was a good partner to be with. They supported the grant. We're very competitive, and they found that they understood what they're doing, and we're happy to be partnering with them.
Council Member Hucker or Committee Chair Hucker, I don't think there's a list of preferred vendors, if that's what you're getting at. I think they looked at the technology application that this particular entity was providing as part of our grant application.
Right. Okay. I appreciate it. So there may be other providers that can provide the same service, and MoveIt hasn't been selected by the FTA in any kind of formal way. There's not an MOU with them or something else.
Only through their commitment to funding to this grant, which specifically identified them as the technology provider.
So were we to move forward with the appropriation, wouldn't you put out a competitive RFP for this, or?
Not in this case. We would put out a RFP, or I don't know if it would be an RFP, but a sole source selection, given the grant funding was tied to this partnership, as was the case with the Proterra.
Is there any danger? But if MoveIt is not on a preferred list with the FTA, and there is competition in this industry space, doesn't that open us up to any sort of procurement challenge or lawsuit from one of MoveIt's competitors?
It's very similar to what happened with Proterra, as Director Conklin said. Once the FTA places it in the grant application process that you should partner with a technology agency, then we can move forward. And procurement, just with our low-no grant where we got the 4 electric buses from Proterra, it's the same circumstance. It's actually tied into the grant.
Do you have any opinion from the county attorney saying this doesn't present any legal risk? Have they seen this?
Other than that, we've successfully done the same thing before with federally grant-supported projects. I don't think we brought this particular one before them.
All right. So I had that process concern. Thank you. I'm not sure I have all my questions answered on that, but then I understand the concern about crowded buses. I'm wondering if that's temporary, since we're talking about a multi-year ongoing expense. We just saw some slides that I noted the average bus has 6 people on it, and it's been dropping in the last few years. So I don't know how many buses have a lot more than 6 if the average is 6. But
Phil, it's probably best for you to speak to that, where we experience that and expect to see it increase. It is somewhat limited in the system.
Yeah, the 6 I think you're referencing, Mr. Hucker, is related to that's a ridership metric comparing ridership to platform hours. That doesn't necessarily represent the average number of riders per trip. I mean, we look at peak trips today. We have peak trips, on our Route 55, 46, 16, 20, where we're averaging 25 to 30 riders per trip. So the average, peak trips do exceed that particular metric you're talking about.
Okay. I also had a question. I forget the name of the study, but can you remind me the name of the study where you're reassessing our ride-on routes to make sure they're optimally efficient and reflective of our current travel patterns and not the need that we inherited from past years?
Yeah, the Reimagine ride-on.
Reimagine. I thought it was Reimagine, but I didn't want to confuse it with Reimagine Public Safety. Okay.
If we had thought that through, we might have named it something else, but it is Reimagine ride-on.
We'll get a new thesaurus. So is this application premature, given that we will presumably be moving some routes from current areas to other areas, or adding buses where we already have crowded?
I don't think so. I think this is a tool in the toolbox to manage the operation, no matter what the route structure ends up looking like.
Okay, and then my third thing, given how this came about, has this ever been identified by the community or transit advisory commissions or anything else as an unmet need? I hadn't heard of this before. I try to follow this issue. I was at ECAB last night for East County Citizens Advisory Board, for example, as with the county exec, and number of members brought up the need for buses on 198 to ideally connect two different BRT routes in the future. And they talked about the number of people walking along 198 to get to either New Hampshire or Columbia Pike. One brought up the need for ride-on to serve Blake High School, that I think is underserved by school buses when kids get out of after-school programs and they need ride-on to supplement there and get home. There's always the concern about weekend service, lack of weekend service for weekend workers and shoppers and everything in East County in particular. That came up. So I think the question will predictably come up that why would we not spend money on those type of identified needs that we have a long list of that are unmet needs in our transit space than a single source contract in this one area for what might be a temporary need that might abate after COVID?
Well, the ability to manage the service isn't a temporary need, and we do regularly, or even through COVID, we have had issues with crowding on the highest ridership bus routes where we frequently dispatch additional service under those conditions. Phil, you might speak more to the nature and degree of complaints you get about crowding.
I mean, the reference that you just made there, Mr. Hucker, to connecting riders between BRT routes and serving a Blake High School. Those are areas that we will identify in the reimagining study and provide and develop a plan to ensure those links are made. In terms of ridership, we're about 60% of where we were pre-pandemic today. But certain routes are closer to 90% of where we were pre-pandemic. And our service levels are just not quite there yet. We do expect to grow those over the next 6 months or so. But there are some existing capacity issues out there today, as Chris mentioned, generally on our heavier ridership routes. The lower ridership routes pre-pandemic still tend to be the lower ridership routes during the pandemic. And we're able to identify those sort of in retrospect, not in real time. And that's what this tool does. It allows you to recognize where you have that real time issue and operationally react, whether it's through a tripper or certainly at least identify to the customer that, hey, this next trip has a lot of people, the following one not quite as many, you may want to make a different decision. That's your choice. But operationally, we're able to respond and add additional resources where we know we have immediate overcrowding.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you. So I just have a couple of questions. One, I just want to circle back to the question and comment about the automatic vehicle locator that Director Conklin said was 20% in transition. And so just curious, what is the completion date for that project and that transition?
Dan, I'll turn that to you.
We're in the process of converting our buses. It takes, we anticipate it'll probably be done early spring of 22 to get almost 400 buses converted over. Mm-hmm. And the good thing is, each time we convert, we're actually putting on antennas that will do the data transmission, that will improve the vehicle location ability of the system. Clever Devices is the name of the product we're using. It's the same product that Obama uses, Chicago Transit Authority, even New York City uses. It's a robust, clever, automated dispatching system that allows our central communications to really know exactly what's going on at any given time.
Great. Well, I'm sorry, is someone else going to chime in? No? Okay. So spring of 2022, great, good to hear that. And so just coming back to this app conversation, is this app going to be a second app, a different app than the one that I already have on my phone?
It will be a supplementary app, yes. So you can basically track through that app.
So I'm not sure this is going to work. And the reason I'm not sure it's going to work is because those of us who wait at the the bus stop, and we open up the Ride-On app, our own existing Ride-On app, to see when the next bus is going to come. That's what we're waiting for. I'm not sure I'm going to open up a second app to see how many people are on that bus, to then try to make some other decision about where I got to go at that point in time. Life doesn't work that way. I want to get on the bus. I want to know when the bus is coming. And yes, I would like the bus to be as cost effective as possible, not for me, but for other people. And so I think we need to rethink this. And I don't think now is the right time to use our funds to supplement a program that I'm not sure fits our needs right now.
Well, the application gives another tool to provide the ability for someone to use our system easier. It feels more comfortable. It feels that they can use transit as an option. And so we're trying to reduce any impediment. One of the impediments we found was the overcrowding. If I can make a customer a little bit better, a little more comfortable, it's application.
So I understand that, but I'll tweak your comment a little bit. To make the customer experience easier, I understand that. And what you're essentially saying is by providing them with more information. And I support that goal, but creating a separate app is not making the user function easier. It is providing them with more information. Can this funding, can we use this to redevelop our current app and to integrate all of this into one? If we can do that, I think that would be a worthwhile investment.
We can look into that, but I don't believe so, because when you fill out the grant application, you kind of you have a description of your intent and purpose and your methodologies to proceed forward with the grant. But certainly it's a question we can ask the FTA.
Well, here, Councilmember Glass, I appreciate your statement and agree with that sentiment. And I also appreciate Councilmember Hucker's concern about the procurement-related components of this. If those are significant concerns to the committee, I think we'd be happy to find those answers and bring this back to you with those answers in hand. And you could make a decision then, or if you prefer to act now, you can act now.
I'm comfortable delaying based on more information if the chair is.
Yeah, to me, I think that, look, I'm not saying this doesn't have some promise and doesn't address some needs that have been identified by both staff and probably some community members. I think in the climate that we're in, it would be hard for me to explain why we would want to spend money on this, particularly on an ongoing basis, instead of many other community identified unmet needs. And I still am a little concerned about why there's one individual contractor named. But when I'm at ECAB again, or in other citizens advisory board or whatever, I think I hear you, Mr. McLaughlin, what you were saying about, all the unmet needs will be addressed by the reimagining study. I'm not sure they'll be addressed. They might be listed, they might be identified, but they won't necessarily be funded. We don't have unlimited funding for weekend service and new bus routes and everything else. That's up to us in the budget process and the CIP. And as long as I've been on this committee for 7 years, there's always unmet need. And it's going to be hard, I think, for me at least, to explain why we're doing this at the expense of many other things that have been raised up by community members year after year after year. So yeah, I still have unanswered questions. This isn't how I wouldn't put this at the top of our priority list. Yeah, I'd prefer to delay this, come back to it, work with the department on some of the answers to the questions that came up today.
Fair enough.
Okay.
So is the committee's recommendation to defer this item then?
I think so. Councilmember Reamer.
I mean, I support it. So I would just be recorded, please, in support of the item. Thanks.
Sure. Okay.
But it won't go to the council then, in other words, on Tuesday, because the committee's decided to defer it to another meeting. We'll bring it back to T&E at a later time, hopefully this season. Okay, thank you.
Can we move, unless we can, we're already well over. How long is the OLO update going to take?
I'm not sure.
Stephanie, hey.
Stephanie, go ahead. You go.
Hi.
Thank you for waiting patiently.
Oh, sure. No issues. Caitlin and I prepared about a 15-minute presentation on the report. Other than that, it's up to, obviously, council member in the discussion.
Okay, yeah, I really got to get out of here soon, but if we can keep it to 15 minutes, I'll be okay.
Well, Mr. Chair, so the OLO report that we're going to get briefed on is one that I commissioned, and with all the flooding that we have received here in Montgomery County and in the DC region, I think it is worthy of serious conversation. And so while I would be pleased to engage in that conversation now, if we don't want to take the time for the substantive follow-up and discussion, then I would ask that we reschedule soon and allocate that appropriate time.
Okay, yeah, no, my bad. I forgot you had asked for that, for this. That's fine with me. It's not preferable, but yeah, we're already at an hour and a half, and I need to go for a call very soon. Yeah, if you all don't mind, you'll be around as we will. So yeah, I think I'd prefer to give it the time that it's due at a upcoming, very soon, imminent session. Okay, I'll work with Dr. Whelan on that.
Climate change is not stopping for our council schedule. So yes, let's do this soon.
It will not go away. All right, good. All right, well, that's I guess that's it for today. So thanks, everybody. Very much appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Status, and I am so proud that all my colleagues on the county council unanimously supported that effort, and it was signed into law by the county executive. And there's one other aspect of my work that my team and I fondly refer to as the Glass Amendment, and that is making sure that whenever a piece of legislation is introduced, it is truly inclusive, to make sure that all gender identities and all aspects of the LGBTQ+ community are represented in that piece of legislation. And when we talk about protections and safeguards, it is really important to know that there are 14 states in these United States that currently have anti-LGBTQ legislation proposed. And much of that legislation is targeting the trans community, banning them from health care that they need, banning them from certain educational opportunities as well. And that is why our efforts here are so important and they're so critical. And again, I just want to thank all of my colleagues and our leaders in Annapolis as well for making sure that Montgomery County and Maryland is an affirming and welcoming place for everybody who wants to live here.
You know, Evan talked about not knowing everybody and everybody's struggles individually. The truth is, I don't need to know your struggles. All I need to know is you're a human being. And every single human being is entitled to the same just treatment. Not the same bad treatment, the same just treatment. Everybody should be treated the same way. Everybody should have equal access. Everybody should have equal opportunity. And nobody should be treated different than anyone else. And that's what we try to do in Montgomery County. We have established, this is Pride Month in Montgomery County. We know we've lost far too many people over the years. You know, this country continues to have murders that are based on people's sexual, I wouldn't say preferences, sexual orientation. And that shouldn't be the case, and yet that continues to be real. People continue to face discrimination. They continue to face derogatory comments. They're demeaned, and that should not be part of any community, and it should not be part of the Montgomery County community. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, and part of accomplishing more is making this recognition normal, of letting everybody know that you need to be a part of this. This isn't something that's done for a group. This is part of who we are. And if we do not treat any members of our group fair, every member of our group fairly, then we're really not doing what we need to do in terms of how we treat people in our community. So this is important. We're an inclusionary community. We've tried to be this for a very long time. In this county, residents, LGBTQ residents, serve as elected officials and public servants and professionals in every branch of our county government, including my CAO. We are widely welcoming to people in the community. We've been woven with this fabric for years, and we're going to continue to weave that fabric and make it deeper. The pride flag, symbolizes both LGBTQ pride, the LGBTQ social movements, as well as the diversity of our community. So I'm happy to join you today. I'm so glad to see so many people here for this event. It is important to make everybody's life normal. There shouldn't be some people who are normal and some people who are not. Everybody's life should be normal. Everybody should be accepted for who they are, what they are, and that should be the beginning of this, and that should be the end of this. So thank you all for being here today.
So it's great to be here with Mark and the whole council and some others, but this is a really, really important event because America has come a long way. I mean, think about at Stonewall and where we are today. What a difference. And all that credit goes to the action that the LGBTQ community has had politically. And we need to continue that action to get us where we need to go. Because this issue is personal to me. I have a niece that is trans, openly trans, and she should have the opportunity, every opportunity that I have. So we've got to keep pulling together in a country full of systemic racism. So with our great successes, we also have a big but. But there were 27 murders so far this year of trans individuals in this country. So while Montgomery County is open and with the times, so many parts of our country are so far behind. A trans LGBTQ individual could be married on Sunday, Monday post their wedding photos, and in 29 states thrown out of their house on Monday. That is just so inherently wrong. So we've got to get through to the finish line, the Equality Act, and that'll restore all the rights to American LGBTQ community. It's passed the House. I was certainly a co-sponsor. We've got to get through Mitch McConnell, the filibuster, and we got to move it through the Senate. But the only way that's going to happen is your continued activity and political involvement. So thank you all for being here today, and let's celebrate Pride Month.
I'm thrilled to be here at the beginning of Pride Month. And maybe because getting older on annual events like this makes me a little wistful and remember how far we've come. As the congressman said, it's so important to remember all the wins we've had have come through hard-fought political battles and lots of sacrifice and lots of involvement. It was over a decade ago, before there was a really well-funded marriage equality campaign in Maryland. Equality Maryland's office was pretty small, and they asked me to hold a lot of the organizing meetings, several of them, at my old office at Progressive Maryland in Silver Spring. And eventually it took off and got the national funding it deserved. And a minute ago I saw former State Senator Rich Madaleno, we ought to recognize, because he helped, along with former State Senator Jamie Raskin, to get marriage equality through the General Assembly. That many years ago. I was serving at the House at the time, was pleased to be one of the original co-sponsors. There's Rich. Give it up for Rich. Thank you for being here and for all your hard work. But a lot of people think we should all be proud, Maryland was the first state to pass marriage equality without a judge making us do that, and the first state to ratify our decision by the voters. So that's a great credit to the people of Maryland. But people think the battle ended there. And as the congressman said, we have so far to go. This is a process. It's not a light switch, the process of changing hearts and minds. There is still so much discrimination out there and big